So we are going to be very academic. So the panelists have, and I'm on the panel, so I'm not really saying much about what I'm doing. So the panelists have about 5 to 7 minutes to speak, and we will go in the order in which they are seated, like that. I think we should wait. We should have questions at the end, rather than asking speakers questions. And I will very briefly, talk about what's on the program Law, Race and Decolonising curriculum. I will say that in 30 seconds. Okay, so starting with the...
Hello everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to be in this conference today. My name is Grace Okoro. I'm a final year PhD student from UW Bristol. I'm currently writing my thesis. It's a bit different from what I saw in the program, because the program had lots of law and but I'll be coming from the science perspective, so please just bear with me. I'll try and keep it as lay as possible so that everyone will understand.
Hello, I don't like to speak through the loudspeaker because sometimes people who are at the back, I think the voice gets sort of mugged up. But can you hear me properly? Yes. Right. Okay, my name is Jose Lingna Nafafe. I am a lecturer at University of Bristol in the School of Modern Languages in the Department of Spanish, Portuguese, Latin American Studies. My research is on Africa. I look at 17th century, but in particular the 17th century Angolan debate on the question of abolition to the slavery. And that debate, they took it to the Vatican, 1684. That is what my research is about, but it's much wider than just simply that particular discourse. So what I'm going to be talking to you about today here is about the new MA we have devised at the University of Bristol, from which I am the director. It is called MA in Black Humanities. So you will hear more about that. A couple of other things that being talked about here about the curriculum. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Eghosa, Ekhator. I'm a lecturer at University of Chester. My area of expertise is on African Union law and environmental justice. So my sort of discussion for today focuses on development of African Union law at my previous university and my teaching of environmental justice at Chester, which incorporates loads of ECOWAS, Nigeria sort of perspective to research. Also, I'm also currently developing expertise on Benin legal history. I'm from Benin Kingdom in Edo State in Nigeria, as I will also discuss during the course of my speech. Benin Kingdom had ambassadors to Portugal in the 15th century. They were sovereign states. So basically, I'm going to be researching about Benin legal history in terms of rule of law and issues like that. Most of African scholars, African researchers tend to neglect our legal history. So that's one of the issues I'm going to discuss today. Thanks.
Okay, so in the next 5 to 7 minutes, I'd just like to let us all know what science research is like in Africa. So I'll be talking about mainly what is happening back in Africa. So according to World Bank data, scientific research from Africa makes up less than 2% of the global research data that is out there, and it's quite discouraging. But it will interest you to know that somewhere between 2012 and 2016, the volume and both in quantity and quality of science research that had gone on in Africa had risen by 42%. So why is there an underrepresentation of this scientific research that is actually going on? What we saw happening was that most of the African researchers publish in journals, so we kind of like to call them predatory journals. So they are journals that are just out there, and they're not really good journals, and they're just after making money. So these journals would take money from the researchers, and most of them are not even peer-reviewed journals, and then you submit your work, and the next day it's published. And research is going on, but it's not being published in the good journals, and this is because the good journals are expensive. So this year, there is a scientific research journal that has been, it's sort of been launched, and the first issue is going to be coming out at the end of the summer. And that journal is called Scientific Research, and it is it's called Scientific African. So it was unveiled in April of this year, and it's also backed by Elsevier. So what they're trying to do is to make sure that it costs $200, which is like half the amount that the big journals would normally require from the scientific researchers. And so this is just to encourage the African researchers in science to be able to publish in a journal that's reputable and would be out there in the world, and do it for less amount of money. Because what we find out from research in Africa, if I want to use Nigeria as an example, is that there are lots of problems as regards research. If you want to do research in Africa, sometimes you have to do it with your own money. And if you compare what is out there in the West and what is in Africa, so just imagine if academics in the West here have to do research from their salary, there will be no research anywhere. So there is inadequate funding for research in Africa, and despite that, people still do research from the little resources that they can get. So if the governments are encouraged to put more money into research, we will see that there will be increase in quality and quantity of research. And there is also the need as well for lots of collaborations, because there's been an increase in the number of African authors of scientific research, but you find that they're in collaboration with universities in the West or different research institutions in the West as well. So I'm a PhD student now. I am sending out a paper, but it's going to come out with the name UW Bristol. I'm an African researcher, but I have done the research here. Or there are African researchers back in Africa who have done the research, but in collaborations with international researchers as well. So that's the representation you get out there. But if African researchers are encouraged to collaborate more with each other, so different African countries collaborating together and doing research, and if the government will help in providing fundings and trying to just make the bureaucracy around migration for research, make it a lot easier for people to be able to move around as well, that will really help scientific research. And another problem we have is that there is lots of brain drain going on in Africa. It is actually an industry on its own to get the best talents and to take them out. So recently, I can't remember if it's one of the social media, I read about a Nigerian doctor who opened up a pregnant woman, got the fetus out, conducted a surgery on the fetus, put that fetus back into the pregnant woman, and that woman carried that baby to term and then had the baby. That is an amazing amount of scientific expertise, but there is underrepresentation of this. He's there in the US, that is where he's practicing, and those are the people who are going to take the credit for whatever it is that he's doing. So it's also important as well to encourage African researchers back in Africa. So if they get enough amount of encouragement that they require, we wouldn't have lots of brain drain, and you would have people be more motivated to stay back there, conduct the research, bring in jobs for people there, create wealth for the continent as a whole, and it's just going to help the economy as a whole.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Adebisi, for inviting me to take place here. Can you hear me properly? Yes. Right. Yes, I think there's been quite a lot of discussion just about 5-10 minutes ago. Talk about the curriculum and all of that kind of thing. What I would like to say is what it takes to design a program for a university degree or a unit. In Bristol, we call them unit. In some other universities, they are called modules. It is not easy. We can talk about the good thing about decolonizing the curriculum. All of this is fine. But the university operates at the level of economics. If anything that doesn't sell wouldn't go through. I think we need to get that clear, that when we talk about decolonizing the curriculum, which is part of one of the drive that drove what we have done in terms of the unit of the program I'm going to show you in a minute, called the MA in Black Humanities. First thing that we had to do with my colleagues was to discuss the name. What sort of name would we give the new MA? The discussion was around blackness, the idea of black history. Some of us proposed Black Atlantic, all of those terms are very nice. But at the end of the day, you've got to do something that is attractive to people outside. Secondly, you also don't want to see yourself as if you are excluding yourself from the rest of the community. Hence, the term black becomes problematic from that point of view. So, in the end, we come up with the term Black Humanities, which is to do with this question of looking at the experience of black people and its diaspora. And that experience doesn't simply revolve around slavery. Black people were as a people prior to slavery. Their history, their culture, their philosophy, their economics, their science. That has been shown in Brazil. Brazil has been influenced by African science, African culture, African history, and many other things, and not only in Brazil. So all of those were part of things that will contribute to what you call the program we got to be designing. But we are in Bristol, so it must have something to do with Bristol. Bristol was involved in the history of Africa in terms of slavery. So our case study for this program will involve that. So the first thing, we have to look for the name. And we also hope that the university have it approved. Because you and I can talk about it, but the university will have to approve it. It has to go through what you may call the quality assurance. And that means that program is viable, it is academically sound. And then once that program is approved, you then must make sure that you have people, colleagues around who are able to be involved in that program to teach you. You have to have mass of people whose research can qualify to teach certain units. There will be more questions if you'd like to ask about that, but I wanted to show you very quickly, because I have now 2 more minutes, possibly to talk about.
1 minute.
1 minute. So I better put the phone down, or simply, the microphone down, just show you what the program is about. Should I come there, or you? That is what the program is about. It is about Black humanity, but we make it what you call a unique, interdisciplinary, and inclusive. So in other words, it is not only to do with black, the slavery and all of that kind of stuff as I've been talking about. We're making it to have included philosophy, arts, anthropology, and all of those other things that you can include within that. But also it must be creative. It is a creative degree, it is transnational, it is global, which means it has a terrain which is to do with Bristol, but also it is global. And it has to do with the African community. It is in this broad sense, it is to do with black history, black culture, black art, black philosophy, and all of that that we can talk about. What I also have here with me is I have leaflet, which if some of you are interested in the MA in Black Humanities in Bristol, you can pass that along. If people are interested, you can come and get some later on. But that is what the program is about, its contribution and what it can offer. If you can, if you like, spread the word around when you go to your own communities, back to your own universities, make sure that the program is being talked about. Or you can use other forum to make sure that this program is spread. The program is starting in 2018, academic year 2008. Thank you very much. I think my minute is up.
Thank you. My experience is very, very unique in the sense that African Union law, which I was a member of the panel that developed it, started from my experience as a PhD student. I did my PhD at the University of Hull. My PhD was titled The Role of Non-State Actors in Regulating Multinational Corporations in Nigeria. So in that PhD thesis, I had a chapter called The Role of the African Union in Regulating Multinational Corporations. So my supervisor, my internal examiner, who's an expert, Dr. Michel, is an expert on international law in Africa, and my supervisor, Dr. Ruksaku, who's an expert on environmental justice in developing countries. So believe that, this is an interesting idea. Let us develop an African Union law module. So that was the basic drive. So we sat down together, developed it. So going back to the point you made in terms of the difficulty, because they were senior members of staff, one of them was a reader, the other one was a senior lecturer. It was easier for them to drive the process. It was easier for them to get the universities to approve. And secondly, because there is an EU module, European Union module, a core law module. So a lot of students were very, very interested in getting to do African Union law, which to them was very good for comparative study. So we had about 25 students, so there was a financial incentive to do it. So that was just in terms of the African Union law. So in terms of environmental justice, when I got to University of Chester, there was one of the staff members left. So they needed a module. They had like 10 or 15 master students. So the staff member left, they were short of 3 modules. So we needed to have a module to replace what they had before. So because of my expertise and because I've taught environmental justice before at my previous school, my HOD said, develop environmental justice, which I did. So during its development, I came from a perspective of an African, of a Nigerian. So even though I was doing environmental justice, we talked about issues like fracking in the UK, we talked about sustainable development in the EU, but I did stuff on ECOWAS Court of Justice, I did stuff on the regulatory environmental justice governance under the African Union, I did stuff on Nigeria, I did stuff on the recent cases, of public cases taken by Nigerian NGOs and Nigerian communities to the UK court. So that came from my expertise as someone who does environmental justice. I was able to basically model the module to what I wanted because there was that desperate need for an LLM module at that time. So I was basically given the free will to do whatever I could do because I had about 3 or 4 weeks to develop the module. And going back to that, the experience of the students have been very, very fantastic. And most of them are from, there's no African students on my LLM module. Yeah, I think there's one from Turkey, a couple from Germany, and home students. There's no single black person. So, and you could see after doing the module, most of them never knew what there was this oil spillage in Nigeria. You show them pictures of the Ogoni spillage, show them pictures of the militants. They're really surprised because the perspective of an environmental justice lawyer in the UK is restricted. No, because fracking is the recent development that has led to this massive awareness of environmental justice. So it's like we don't have any environmental justice issues in the UK. We don't need to do environmental law, we need to do environmental justice, but we show them pictures of what is happening in Nigeria, what is happening in Peru, what is happening in other countries. So with that, I was able to basically impact on the curriculum. So further to that, the current research which I'm doing now, which Dr. Foluke is very, very much aware, I realized, yes, I've got PhD in law, I realized that I was bereft of some knowledge of African history. I'm from Benin Kingdom. Benin Kingdom in Nigeria, Benin Empire was a very, very massive empire. It was very developed. When the first Europeans that came to Nigeria came to Benin City, the Portuguese. The first church in Nigeria was in Benin City. So Benin City had ambassadors to Portugal. So the thing was that there was this massive impact of Portuguese influence on Benin culture. And so I'm saying there was rule of law. Benin was a sovereign state. Benin had an ambassador to Portugal, so they had agreement, they had stuff. So why are Africans or Nigerians not owning their research? So that sort of was a massive influence. Recently, I've been trying to read stuff on Ministry, and lo and behold, I'm saying stuff on the impact of African international law, the impact of the early scholars of international law. They're basically racist. They never saw Africans as a people, uncivilized, uncolonized. We're bringing freedom. We're bringing. They had no sense of the African culture. The Benin City was compared to Liverpool, Bristol. It was well tarred, it had street lights, it had every single feature of a sovereign state. So that's why we as Africans, we as scholars, there's so much for us to do. In terms of comparative research, there's so much you can do. If you're doing your master's dissertation, undergraduate, PhD, if you compare African Union, I'm a member of this African Union Research Network. We've done a couple of meetings last year in Bristol at the LSE. There's so much going on in Africa that we as African scholars and African diaspora are not aware of. And just to round up, Haiti is an observer to the African Union. The diaspora is like the sixth plank of the African Union sort of framework. It's part of the African Union. So we as Africans or African diaspora, we can connect to the African Union. We can do stuff for Africa, even though we are living in the West. Thank you.
Very briefly, on my research, law, race, and decolonising the curriculum, I don't want to focus on law because so many people have been talking about law, as Chris said. I think with disciplines, every discipline, and I think Eva mentioned this earlier about medicine and how maybe decolonisation is not a massive problem. Every discipline has to think about how that discipline was developed. One of the things I will be teaching next year is a short, part of a model on law, race, and the body, and it's part of a medical law unit. And we're looking at things like Henrietta Lacks, whose DNA was used to sort of solve lots of, I'm very bad at science, lots of massive medical problems. We're looking at things like, so there's research done in the US that black people generally tend to be given less pain medication than white people because the belief is that they don't feel as much pain. So there is a lot to be looked at within every single discipline. Look at the history of the discipline. How was it developed? That is a massive, massive thing. So because we are running, let's say slightly behind time, I'm going to open the floor to 2 questions. Only 2 questions. I see a hand. I need another hand. Okay. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to take your questions and then let them be answered. So question number 1. Yes. Yeah, you.
Mine is not actually a question. It's just I wanted to say something directly with he said, because I sort of doing history as well. I totally agree with what you said, but the thing is that when European people came to Africa, they never thought that we were inferior. They knew we were not inferior. Freddie Macaulay said something. He said, when the European people, the people that created a cartel to divide Africa, when they got to Africa, what they said was, Freddie Macaulay, this was his quote, he said, I have never seen such people with dignity. There was no poverty. There was no beggars. So they impart this to us. If there were no beggars in Europe, they wouldn't have known that there was no beggar in Africa. So they knew that. So, and when they also came, they realized that beneath the statues that we were creating, it was so sophisticated. That was why they stole it. So the thing is that European people don't think that we're inferior. No, they're constantly looking for something to look down on. And because they need that, is that a self-esteem? They tie their self-esteem to whiteness. So in order for European people to be superior, there has to be black people. Because you can't be white if there's no black. So we were never inferior. Because if we were inferior, why are they constantly, if you're already inferior, why do you have to try to say you are inferior? You're already inferior, isn't it? So you can't be saying to people you're inferior when you already think you're inferior. It doesn't make sense. So they never thought so. So I think African people need to get this thing straight. And I was saying to one of the ladies that interviewed me earlier on, I said we have a problem in Africa. We don't want to study. That's the thing. We say, oh, Afia said this, Akela said this, Chimamanda said this. Yeah, but you can get quotations, but you have to study in order for you to be able to understand better your culture. But we don't want to do that. We want to look good, we want to look like, we want to be a lawyer. But the thing is that in Africa today, there's something that's going to happen to them because there's BBC Pidgin English right now. My friends are saying, oh, they want to learn English. I said, watch it. How many European people think they're going to learn Pidgin English? I said, they're not going to learn Pidgin English. This is another delusion they're telling you now that they want to study Africa. The only reason they're doing that because African economy is growing fast. IMF said in 2050, 80% of the world is going to be living in Africa. And it's already happening right now. European people are living in Africa as I'm talking to you right now. So, and there's still apartheid going on in Namibia. So if we don't study, what happened before Professor Shashish Taro is an Indian professor and a politician. He also said this. I don't think African people should hate European people. I said, well, you need to understand what has happened. Because if you don't understand, it's going to repeat itself again. It will repeat itself because it's already happening. African people don't understand the semiotics that the European people say. They don't understand the game the way which the game plays. We don't understand that because we don't study. But we need to understand that. You know, when I first of all came to Europe, I was really angry about racism. I didn't understand it. But my inquisitiveness, I wanted to know because it doesn't make sense. I don't understand. How can you be so white and so better than me, yet you need to go and attempt to oppress me? How does this one make sense? So how did I do this? For me, I started seeing these people as my fellow Nigerian person. You know, I went to, when I was doing some business course, I'm from a middle class family in Nigeria. You know, I have never been poor. I don't know how to be poor. But every time I go to the shop, the school, they always, this thing I'm going to say, when you're talking about wealth, you're never going to be able to speak about wealth without people saying you're showing up. I don't have any shoes or any bags that is not designer. So when I go to school, I had to hide the name because people were jealous of me. These are pink people who are supposed to be better than me. It doesn't make sense. Then I take this up with the director. When I told the director said to me, I'm really sorry, it's jealousy. I said, I know, because I don't see what I see as a fellow Nigerian person. I think African people need to, when you're dealing with European people, you have to see first. This is my friend. Why is he doing that? What would my friend do if this has happened to me, if this was happening? What's my friend? Then I'm thinking, my husband said, no, it's jealousy. Then sometimes I said to me, it's not you, it's them. You know, he said, because they need to feel white. They need to feel special. I said, when we're in the shop, when sometimes, you see, when they see me, I went to Boots, I want to pay. Immediately I want to pay, the woman see my jewelry, she literally looked at me like this. As though how can this African person be like, dressed like this? She did it again the second time, third time, fourth time. What happened? Eventually, I had to report the company. The company apologized to me, told me they can give me a discount for 1 month. I said, I don't need a discount. I just don't want this to happen to another person. So Africans need to know we were never inferior. We were never inferior.
On that note, well spoken, I think man, woman, black, white, I think we all know that historical games have been played of divide and conquer. And along with that is back with what Eghosa said, suppression of information and lack of moving information around. That's part of it as well, of divide and conquer. And I'll introduce myself. I'm Karen. I came here in '96. We talk about Windrush. We talk about people brought in
I'm so sorry. Gentlemen said, could you ask your name? We can't see you, so we would like to know your name.
My name's Karen. I came here in 1996, and back to even what Grace was mentioning about the brain drain. We know that part of divide and conquer and also staying on top is constantly poaching from other countries. And even though I am a very small percentage of, say, white Christian females that were brought from abroad, I think for that reason, when I look around the room, whether it was in Oxford, I'm talking since '96, in Whitechapel, in St. Thomas's where I work now, I work with predominantly Christian, Irish, Welsh, African women. You know, and that's my take. That's only my perception since I've been working here since '96. But we have to remember that it is part of the brain drain. It's about part of being staying on top, and it is like Grace said, and it is about staying on top. So as long as we keep spreading information, and of course, you know, we know anyone that's educated can just go to the museum here and see the hidden treasures. You know, anyone that even looks around is inquisitive and wants to know all of our history about how we're here all together. We can just keep asking and connecting, and that's what is brilliant about this panel here today. We're all connecting. Maybe have another one every year. Thank you.
I'm sorry, there's only one thing I wanted to add to my colleague. My colleague said, in order for them to be able to colonize us, they have to make us feel inferior. That was what Freddie my colleague said. So the inferiority was something that was created. It wasn't there before.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr.
Eghosa.
That was unique, as you said, your research and the focus, specifically the comparative study which you've done and reference to any state, which I've read a little bit, but today you open my mind more. Now, the Benin state was a sovereign state on its own, kingdom, right? How come it is part of Nigeria and now, yeah, it is part of Nigeria and all the other influences, all the power it possessed is being eroded first. And secondly, the research you're doing, how much are you linking with the African, the collaborative approach with the university in Africa and AU?
Responses should be short because we're going to have
Collaboration with Africa. I think the governments in African universities need to set up equipment and a proper research institute to start with. Because I would sincerely tell you that everything I have done in my PhD, I cannot do it in Nigeria. I haven't seen anywhere that I can do it in Nigeria, and that's quite sad because you get so much skills here, you get so much experience and training, and if you think about taking it back, it's difficult for you because you need those things to be on the ground for you. So I think it's speaking, talking to people, passing the information around is going to open up everyone's eyes. Because one example is I was in an appraisal back in Nigeria, and I was asked the question, oh, so Ebola, how do we combat Ebola? How do we do Ebola research? There was no point for me to go ahead to say, oh, do this, do that. I said to them, look, we need light, we need water. If you don't have these two things, I'm not having this conversation with you. And that was where it ended. Because there's no point saying, how do you do Ebola? How do you... The basic things that you need to do research are not there. So I think talking and passing the information around and collaborating with our friends back in Africa would just, it might be slow, but we will get there eventually.
I think it is important, I think you hit the key there, that collaboration with other universities in Africa. You need economics, you need money. You can't do it without money. I think African Union need to be setting some money aside for research, like what EU is doing. The big money that comes for research at British universities in particular, well, most of universities in Europe, come from EU. So clearly Africa would have to look at itself and think of its own priorities. What exactly, because the world is no longer now conquered as we did. We fought war using guns. Those times are over. We have to battle on other ground differently. So I think from that point of view, Africa would have to take a look at itself. Secondly, I think my colleague wanted to talk more about Benin. But what I would say is clearly that the case of what happened in Benin wasn't just a unique case. We have that particular case too happening in Congo. It's happening in Angola. It happened in many parts of Africa. Africans were sent their ambassador to Portugal in those early days. I have evidence of that because I read Portuguese, I read Latin, and I read other documents. So clearly you've got to learn those languages which the Europeans were writing at that time. And you've got to chase those documents, not only in Portugal, you have to chase them to the Vatican, you have to chase them to other places. So there is a need to learn African languages too, if we are to understand the dynamic of how those laws function at the time. We need to know the terms, how were they used in Africa, what these languages mean by those particular terms. So we still have a lot to do, but at the same time, yes, we have to feel encouraged. There is quite a lot of research being going on. I am doing research in Bristol. I'm looking at the question of African debate on the question of abolition. And this particular debate was taken to the Vatican, as I was saying earlier, in the 17th century. 1684. Who did it was an Angolan priest who was sent to Brazil as a prisoner of war. He ended up being sent to Portugal. He studied in Portugal. After that, he went to the Vatican and presented a case about abolishing slavery. But how did he do it? He debated it through legal system at the time, using three principal legal sides. He talked about slavery that could not have existed because law, human law, doesn't allow slavery to exist. He said slavery could not have existed because natural law does not allow slavery to exist. Slavery could not have existed because divine law would not allow it. So all of these principles, we have to look at them not within the context of Europe, but also within the context of Africa. What does human law mean? What does natural law mean at that time for the African? So all of these require to be said, but you need money to do it. Especially when you are at university, you are under pressure to publish. If you don't have money, you can't wander off to many places. And this is where the limitation of collaboration with Africa comes in. If you don't have research funding, you can't do that research. Otherwise, you lose your job at the university where you are.
Thank you very much. I'll just quickly answer the question about the Europeans seeing Africans as inferior. The Europeans that came to Africa in the 16th, 15th century saw Africa as equals. The Europeans that came in the 19th century saw Africans as savage people, were to take slaves. The first Portuguese that came with a very, very fantastic motive. But the English people, the other Europeans that came in the 19th century was a different ballgame. So are you going to justify that you can sell people? Are you going to justify that these people can, there were treaties with African countries, African nations. They had treaties that basically said you are taking over, the Queen of England has the right over this territory. They signed treaties with African people, and they basically took over these African nations. So they came with an ulterior motive, using colonialism, religion, as a cover. There was an article I read about the Portuguese influence on Benin culture. There was some Portuguese reverend fathers who were having some problems with about Benin. They were basically locked in a place in Benin. They couldn't go out. So they had to send a letter to the Pope that they needed to leave Benin. So that shows there was a lot of interaction. There were letters written by the Pope to the King of Portugal. 15th century, there was no problem. It was when saw slavery as a new gold mine. That was when the dynamics changed. So for you to sell someone, it has to be inferior to you. So that's just the argument. So you have to justify that on the basis of religion, whatever. So that's to answer that question. So coming back to, in terms of the African and Benin sort of research, I've done a lot of collaborative research with African scholars, joint papers, book projects with scholars in Africa. I'm trying to look for funding to do more sort of training in Nigeria. But the thing is that getting funding from the African Union might be very, very difficult. The African Union can't even fund itself. First, the African Union Secretariat was built by the Chinese. The Eghosa Secretariat was built by the Chinese. They can't actually fund themselves. Take away the foreign support from Western countries and the money paid by Nigeria, Egypt, and rich African countries, yeah, you'll be dead. So that's just the reality of the situation. In terms of what we can do, right? I'm a member, in terms of collaboration, I'm a member of this African research network, which is based at the University of Sussex, funded by one of these UK organizations. They've actually got funding. I think what you can actually do now is easier to get funding on African issues from UK funding bodies, because that's the way to go. Even though African Union law was first developed by my previous university, another professor applied for it and got funding for it to run workshops. It's got sort of a project with Cambridge, a book project. So that's why I was invited to be a member of that research group. So we can actually get funding from UK-based organizations. And also for African researchers, for students in diaspora in Africa, we actually have an essay competition currently being run by this African research network. I think this is £300 first prize, second prize £200, third prize £100. So it's the LPS prize for African Union law. So if you're interested, I'll leave the flyers for anybody that's interested. And so that's some of the things we are doing to propagate African Union law, to make people being aware of what African Union is actually doing, even though it might be difficult, but you have to look at the bright side. Otherwise, there'll be nothing for us to hold on to. Thanks.
Thank you, thank you. I'm just going to recommend one book for you called Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram Zendi. And the reason is because, the question about what came first, racist policies or racist attitudes. According to Ibram Zendi, racist policies preceded racist attitudes. But yeah, like I said, I'm not going to be very lecturing today. So can we appreciate our speakers once again?